A sublime Sutton snatches top spot in the championship at a sunny Snetterton. Here is the Snetterton review.
Hello everybody and welcome back for take 2 of the Snetterton review. Every single record there is something that we find that goes wrong or we can tweak or we haven't done particularly well. This time we lost the entire recording, so it's a new experience for us. So we're going again. Apologies for the delay, but you have had the driver grades and you have had me, I would say, successfully putting up a chair. In the end,
with a little bit of help from me.
Well, what was that? Is it the Beatles song? You get by with a little help from your friends. I mean,
Yeah.
or, you know, synergy, the pod in action. Sam, if you can remember Snetterton, we did go.
Yes.
How are you, first of all, today?
My ear has just started to peel from the sunburn. I noticed this morning, and my knees are still quite red, but not peeling. So I think I've saved those. But yeah, it was definitely warmer than I expected at points, but cold towards the end of the day.
I mean, the public information appeal went out. We said, wear a hat, take a brolly,
Yes.
use sun cream. You failed on all of those fronts. Other than you did wear a hat at times. You did, yeah.
I had a hat that got us to help us be spotted on TV as well.
Twice.
We are famous now.
We always dreamt of being on ITV, and it has finally come round. So that's great news. How are your sunburnt legs?
Yeah, they're not too bad now. They fully recovered, and they don't hurt when I kneel down or anything. So looking good on that side of things.
Just remind me, did we do it on the driver grade, your science about the sun? Or so we've not lost that content. Brilliant. So if you've not heard that, Sam has got a fantastic scientific take on the sun and its rays. Carl Pilkington, eat your heart out.
I think there's something in it, but you're not a believer.
No, but for that, you've got to go listen to the driver grades. For this, it's Snetterton, and the best place to start is on the Saturday with the qualifying.
Yeah, qualifying was back to its standard old format this time out, with a 30-minute session. And again, it was packed full of a few incidents. Halstead, going into the session, had his engine changed through FP2 due to some issue, and probably caused the first big issue of qualifying in the fact that he then dropped oil at Coram, causing 5 other drivers to slide off as a result of it. Lloyd had a massive sideways moment through the grass when he caught the oil. Butcher, I don't think, was picked up by ITV coverage, showing that he'd gone off as well. Patterson we saw sliding and spinning around as well, but the biggest casualty as such, apart from Halstead himself, was Turkington, who span off and nudged his nose into the barrier as well as just touching the rear end, but he would get the car back out, get the car back to the pits as the red flag was brought out for around about 15 or 20 minutes because they had to patch all the oil that was running pretty much coming out of Bomb Hole all the way through Coram. He'd cut across the grass at Murray's and then gone into the pits. So there was a fair amount of clear up work to do.
Yeah, the smile was, I can't hear incident without hearing incident anymore. But yeah.
Yes, it was an interesting one and probably a sign of how Halstead's weekend actually turned out. It wasn't a good one for him, which we'll pick up along the way. But after the cars got back out, Powell had an interesting moment, shall we say, coming out of the pits, on cold tyres, cold brakes. You think, just a little bit cautious on the outlap that you need to be to get the car all nicely up to temperature once again. But no, he decides to go barreling into turn 1, lock up both front tyres and then go straight on through the gravel. He was actually quite lucky, in my eyes, to get it out of the gravel.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. Yeah, you just got to put it down to a mistake, haven't you? And if it was anybody else, you wouldn't. Yeah, I do feel a little bit for him because if it was anybody else, you'd just go, oh, okay. But yeah, it doesn't help that coupled with the difficult start One Motorsport have had, and the difficult start in particular he has had to the season. But it was good good footage, good content for people watching at home. A reason to log on to YouTube on a Saturday.
Yes, it certainly was. But as the times got underway, as you'd expect, BMW set the early pace with not having to switch their tyres over. But we kind of had an idea of who was going to be up there and challenging, and the Napa Fords were looking quick as well. However, one of those Napa Fords did have quite a big incident for Camish's sake. I've not had seen him do anything like this before. At turn 10,
Well,
how. Go on.
not not voluntarily. No,
Not
we've seen
voluntarily, no,
we've seen him
yes.
go off at high speed before, and the heart still breaks. But yeah,
So yeah, at turn 10, Hamilton, which is the fast left-hander on the infield section of the 300 circuit, it looked like he maybe turned in a little bit too early. There was tyre bail on the left-hand side, so corrected out of that. Had to try and catch the spin. Got onto the grass, and as he was trying to collect that spin up, make contact with the barrier, and then came to a rest nearly back on the track just before turn 11. Enough damage on the car to put him out on the spot, and he'd only set one fast lap time at that point. I think it had him in third at that point because he caused another red flag. He would have that lap time deleted, and then obviously demoted to near enough the back of the field, along with Halstead and Jade Edwards, who we'll get onto now. She managed to have her time disqualified, unfortunately, for car infringements which were found after the session, which was much to your bitter disappointment.
well, yeah, because I had her to outqualify Powell, which she did comfortably,
Which she
and
did, yeah.
which I think she qualified 20th, I think, which is pretty good effort. But unfortunately, the time, as you say, was lost for car infringement reasons. We're not entirely sure what those reasons were, but yeah, it is what it is, and she was disqualified from the session, as you say.
Yeah, as we understand, there are random checks that are taken after each session, and I would assume that she is just one of those cars, unless another team has launched a protest for some reason. She may well have been one of those randomly checked cars that unfortunately failed on one aspect of the checks. A few drivers to note then. Ashley Sutton took pole with an outstanding lap, nearly 3.5 tenths quicker than anyone else. And in touring car terms, that's
That's
almost a lifetime.
ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
From Tom Ingram, who wasn't feeling well, as you'll get
Was
to
he
know
not?
throughout this. Wasn't feeling well this weekend. And then followed by the two BMWs in Colin Turkington and Jake Hill. All BMWs managed to get inside the top 10, which we kind of expected with this being a BMW based circuit. Ricky Collard probably the standout in the top 10 for me, up there in fifth. We know that he's shown some good pace this season, if been a little unlucky at some points. And probably the driver to disappoint me the most was Sam Osborne down in 17th. With how quick the Napa Fords looked in practice this weekend, I thought he was going to be verging on the edge of top 10, which, as we'll get onto in the races, he managed to achieve, but his qualifying was a little underwhelming.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's also a bit of a stinker for the Auto Bright side of the hard garage. Obviously, Lloyd had his brown trouser moment going off on the oil. Thompson, as we'll get on to the rest of the weekend, didn't really get the car hooked up at all. We discussed that a little bit on the driver grades as well. But yeah, given that the high they had at Brands Hatch and the solid start they'd had at Donington, this was quite a disappointment, albeit they reckon they've already found the problem isolated and it's going to be sorted ahead of Thruxton. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, they qualified down in 15th and 18th. And it was quite a surprise to see that the top 9 drivers were covered by a second. We're used to in previous seasons seeing maybe 20, 22 cars covered by less than a second. I just wonder whether there are some different elements this year that are causing these wider rare times, or whether
Yes.
Snetterton was just a different circuit, different conditions.
Well, I'll tell you what it was, Sam. It was hybrid. It was hybrid
Yes, definitely
because,
hybrid.
as you've seen, the top 5 all had no high or next to no hybrid, but were still quicker than the rest of the field. So that is what's happened. The hybrid has worked brilliantly, except it's gone in reverse, and actually it weakens the car. Yeah, it takes away 40 horsepower rather than gives it.
Yeah, we'll pass over it a couple of times throughout the race reviews that we'll go on to. But yeah, hybrid is. I'm starting to question it somewhat.
Welcome to my side. I'll wave a flag in your honour.
So just to finish out the top 15 then, Adam Morgan was in 6th, followed by Josh Cook in 7th, Rory Butcher up there in 8th, still in his Toyota Avensis, according to BTCC website. Dan Rowbottom in 9th, Jelly in 10th, followed by Chilton, Gamble, Taylor Smith, Ronan Pearson and Dan Lloyd.
Well, that might be why Butcher's not been quite up to speed this season if he is racing the chassis of the Avensis, but under the Corolla badge. Maybe that's the reason.
Yeah, possibly.
Right, shall we get on to race number 1 then?
Yes.
Just getting the website up, and that gives you a little quick break.
He asked if I had my notes ready.
I've got my notes ready, so I've got the result up. But it gives you a chance to you have to cut this anyway. On the audio anyway.
Yeah, but all of this is going on YouTube, mate. It's content.
That's fine. They'll laugh
at me. I love it when I'm more ready than you are.
They've laughed at me for putting up a chair. Let's laugh at me getting my notes wrong. It's all fine. Right, are you ready to start?
Yep.
Okay, so as we said, Edwards had to start at the back of the grid due to her technical infringement in qualifying. It was a very good start by Ash Sutton, who hooked the start procedure up very well indeed. Very poor by Ingram, slow, sluggish, uncharacteristic, and ended up being completely out to dry on the outside. But he wasn't well, as we have said.
He was feeling under the weather, mate. Yeah,
he was, and that may have.
You're a bit sluggish when you don't feel well, so yeah, I can understand it.
Yeah, I agree. Camish was battling his way through the pack on hard tyres. Obviously, I've sort of glossed over there. All the BMWs started on soft. Ash Sutton started on the medium, and Camish at the back started on the hard. What is slightly surprising is that all the BMWs started on exactly the same tyre, and that wasn't so much a problem in this race, but we're going to get to on, I think, race 3, just how mental a strategy it turned out to be.
Bizarre decision. I think we talked a little bit about it in the driver prediction review pod that actually worked the first time round. Yeah, about how strange their strategy was this weekend.
And even though they all started on softs for this race, I'm amazed not one of them started on the medium for this race. Or you sacrifice some of that jelly and get the hard out of the way and see what the data's like for the afternoon. But anyway, we'll come to that more because it had more of an effect in race number 3. Chilton had a problem on lap 1, which meant he dropped to the back of the field, but all was not lost because even though he was nearly a lap down, he was still able to catch up and pass Nick Halstead by the end of the race, along with, did he do somebody else?
I think he got Jade, but I think she had a few gremlins because she was running, I think, there or thereabouts with Patterson, a teammate, and then she dropped back in the final couple of laps. And Chilton was able to get back past her towards the end.
I will say it's not great for Halstead in the equal machinery to be caught like that by Chilton. I'm willing to give a pass to Edwards on the basis that car, there's problem after problem with it, isn't there? Whereas Halstead, okay, it's a new engine. There's probably a bit of lack of confidence in the car, but to be caught by your teammate who's basically a lap down, it's not.
I think the bigger issue is seeing the best lap time that they did throughout the race. And I mean, Halstead's best lap time was just over, a smidge over 2 minutes. Whereas you compare that to his teammate, Ronan Pearson, who has only been in the car since the start of the year, a 1:57.7. That's a chasm of performance. And you got to ask, where is it?
And also, not only did Chilton pass him, he ended up 10 seconds up the road.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah, I know.
Bonkers.
A weekend to forget for him.
One of the slightly concerning things for me on this race is that obviously the tyre offset, they had to run all 3 tyres this weekend. We're seeing that coming again at Croft. But all the BMWs who are Snetterton track on paper and on the best tyre couldn't make any inroad into Sutton whatsoever. By the end of lap 1, he was already 2 seconds down the road from Colin Turkington. And the BMW, who could heat the tyre up quicker, get it all working quicker, look after it slightly better, couldn't make any inroads to Sutton on the, quote, inferior tyre. Do you see any concern about that? Or is it just a case that Sutton is very, very good and you could give him a brick instead of a tyre and he'd probably still get it working pretty well?
Well, I think he said after this race that he knew he had to get some almost qualifying style laps in at the start to get the lead. because you say the BMWs heat their tyres up nicely, but they always seem to struggle in the first couple of laps, and I think that's front end grip. Rear end grip, they're absolutely fine because that's where all the power is transferred to. But front end through the corners, I think, is where they lose out on the first couple of laps because they aren't able to get enough heat in them, even with the warm up lap. So I think he made the most of those opening laps, got the gap that he wanted or was comfortable with. I think 4.5, 5 seconds, as you said, and then almost settled into his own rhythm for the race. And then, as you'll go on, just the BMW started to warm up nicely, and then we're able to show a little bit more pace.
Yeah, my only concern is that by the end of lap 2, Sutton was already in Hampshire getting ready to start race 1 of Thruxton. And it took really until lap 10 for the BMW to get back at him. That's a long time. Snetterton, which is a 3-mile circuit more or less.
Yeah.
And it's a circuit where BMW are supposed to be strong. To not catch him until lap 10, by which point Sutton's backed off anyway. I mean, he's bringing the car home. He's not pushing any further. I just think that there's too much of an offset between the hard and the medium and too little an offset between the medium and the soft, personally, is my view. Although I will also accept that Snetterton is not necessarily a great place to try out this tactic because I don't think there's many obvious overtaking zones. The infield section is very interesting because it's technical, it's tight, but realistically, you don't make too many passes in the infield section. I'm looking forward to seeing how this works at Croft because I think there's more natural overtaking points at Croft where you'll see this offset work slightly better.
Yeah, I think I said, I'll get to at the end, is the hard tyre was a weird one this weekend because although Camish used it in this race and was able to make progress, he was able to make progress against people we would expect him to make progress on, despite the tyre. Yeah. But then he got stuck just on the outskirts of the top 10 and wasn't able to go any further. Yes, there was some good defending in there from Aaron Taylor-Smith, but I think the tyres need to be closer set together, especially medium to hard. Maybe more of a drop-off from the soft. I think the soft lasted way too long this weekend. Probably Hill should have been faster in the earlier stages and made more of an effort to get up to Sutton rather than getting really close to him right by the end. But as you say, I think Sutton was just managing it.
But two points on that. First of all, obviously Hill was stuck behind Turkington for a while, which we'll get to in a moment. But also, just going back to Camish, of course, last year he struggled to make moves through the pack, particularly the mid-pack when he was down there. I don't know if it's just he's not quite a one of the car. I know it's further with the car this year than he was last year, but there were sort of throwbacks to last season a little bit. There's a problem. Sorry, go
on. I think race 3 completely contradicts that. I think he knows the car that he's got under him, and as long as it's on a preferred tyre, I think the soft and the medium are much preferred tyres compared to that hard. And I
agree.
The Napa 4, I think all cars work better on it compared to the hard.
Except Sutton, who could just make it work.
Yeah.
As we'll come to. Problem for Collard, who pulled off on the straight with a water pump issue and then had a lovely seat in a marshal's chair. I feel for Collard because obviously there's a lot coming into this about the track limits, and part of me thinks just let it go. On the other hand, I think we've also lost your first BTC win, so I understand that there's still emotions. We are looking to launch a new series called 10 Minutes With, and we shall be looking at stuff like track limits in a quick 10-minute style video. So we'll be launching that in the off season. When I say the off season, the summer break. So keep an eye out for that. We then saw Hill starting to pile the pressure on Turkington, and I absolutely love and I'm completely absolutely here for the lack of, for want of a better word, respect Hill has. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He wants to overtake, and he is not going to show, it's Colin, I must do it cleanly, I must do it as, can't touch him. No. If you're in the way, I'm coming past.
No team cooperation there, is there at all? No. He's definitely parted himself from that WSR unit. Yes, okay, they're still running the car as such, but being in that MB side really is quite obvious with how he races with the other BMWs.
And this was epitomised by his move. 2 wheels on the grass, rude, aggressive, brave, round the outside into the S's. Colin didn't want to fight it, and I've talked until the cows come home about Colin and racecraft. But on this one, I think he was probably wise not to overly fight it, because the last thing you want is to have 2 BMW spinning across the S's like we had with Sutton and Plato a couple of years back, because it just doesn't look good for anybody. But it's the sort of stuff I love to see from Hill. He then went into hyperspeed and caught up to Ash Sutton, but wasn't really in a position to attack him. Although it was a good effort to try and go for the win.
Yeah, it was a good effort. As you say, there were only a couple of laps left at that point, and he managed to catch him really quite quickly. I was actually quite surprised by how much Turkington squeezed over to try and narrow that gap on the back straight, but Hill literally just kept his foot in it and was going, right, I'm going for this. This is my chance. And yeah, managed to pull it off.
What I will say is that this is where I really don't understand how track limits work, because I'd argue that that's a advantage he's gained by leaving the track, i.e. he's put two wheels in the dirt. That means he's been able to continue the move and get track position, even though he's left the track. I think it's fine, personally. I think it's hard racing. If you want to risk putting yourself on the track at grass or over 100 miles an hour, then that's ballsy and that's fine. But I also think that if you're going to start taking away race victories for cutting a corner slightly, then that doesn't quite sit well with me. I think what Jake Hill did is worse than what Collard did, if you're going to look at what track limits should be punishable with, personally. And also, he's clearly gained it's more obvious to see where he's gained an advantage. He's literally gained a place through an overtake that starts by going off the circuit. Collard has gained 2 tenths by leaving the white line. This is where I think the whole, and we'll talk about this when we do our Take 10 episode on this, because it's a mess, frankly. Have you seen?
I think Harvey summed it up is the fact that it is regulated, but only in certain areas. If it was regulated for the whole track, then a move like that wouldn't have been allowed.
Have you seen the pictures that come out today about what now constitutes track limits?
I don't think so. I've seen the release of some of the pictures from Snetterton where a photographer stood in the same place, which was actually going through Hamilton, and you could see directly behind the car, he took a snap within about 15 seconds of all the cars that went through. And I think 10 of them managed to drop their outside wheels off the back of the curb, which I think which is now the extension of track limits.
What I'd say is that go on to TH Motorsport BTCC YouTube's Twitter page, because they've put up a photo of this, and what now constitutes track limits. To me, this is ripping the heart out of racing, but it's hard to really discuss without seeing the picture. So what we will do is try and find that ourselves and put it up on the socials at another time when we do the track limit episode.
Yep.
Right, that pretty much ends lap one, well, race one. So a recap: Sutton took the race win from Jake Hill, from Colin Turkington. Tom Ingram came fourth with the fastest lap time as well. Adam Morgan, Stephen Jelly, Dan Rowbottom, Josh Cook, Rory Butcher and Aaron Taylor-Smith rounded up the top 10, with Dan Camish, Ronan Pearson, Sam Osborne, George Gamble and Daniel Lloyd making out the top 15. Missing out on points, the sort of big names, Thompson, Doble, Watson, Moffat in that area, and Chilton, of course, who also missed out on points for this race.
Right, let's move on to race 2. So before race 2 even got kicked off, there were issues on the grid for Josh Cook. There were mechanics still around his car, with the 30-second board being raised on the start line, which was going to mean trouble for him as they got into the race. He managed to pull away, though, onto the formation lap without any issue. Just looked like they were working on something just right up until, well, over the time even. And you were quite impressed with the way they got the bonnet shut, weren't you, sir?
It was the greatest showman trick. Take off the bonnet rod, chuck it to another mechanic, narrowly avoiding one of the mechanic's heads, and then he caught it. What was missing? He didn't do a little spin and a ha at the end, but it was still quite a good little routine. Well worked on.
Can't imagine what health and safety must say about that.
It's a 7 from me.
So yeah, he managed to get onto the formation lap, but his luck in this race was dying quickly, shall we say. Sutton and Rowbottom were on softs for this race, crucially, and they were probably the drivers to watch out for. As you said, all 4 BMWs had gone onto the mediums, as had a lot of other drivers, including Dan Camish, who had obviously made progress through the field to 11th. Ingram, a poor start once again. Must have been because he was feeling under the weather.
I had heard a rumour.
I had heard. And Cook was slow coming out of Wilson, which is the second corner hairpin. Uncharacteristically, we thought it was because of the troubles that there were on the formation lap or on the grid, but it would actually turn out as he came through Palmer that he had a puncture on the front right tyre, which would just compound the issues, because on top of that he would then get given a drive-through penalty for obviously his mechanics still being working on the car up to or over time. So he would come.
He must have felt quite deflated.
Oh dear, you've been cooking that one up, haven't you? Hey.
Tread carefully.
He came in and obviously got that puncture sorted out on the opening lap, and then on the second lap had to come in and serve his drive-through, which actually brought him out into the massive gap that Sutton had made once again, following his excellent start. Again, 4.5, 5 seconds. Cook slotted in nicely behind him after his pit and penalty, and actually managed to keep pace with him for the whole race, which was quite interesting to see. I'm wondering if this is the turn the corner moment for One Motorsport, and they've managed to find the performance where it's necessary. And going to Thruxton, Cook's probably going to think his luck's in being king of Thruxton.
I would just say to me, the pessimist, and like to prick the balloon of optimism. Of course, he was picking up quite a nice tow from Ash Sutton. Managed the gap nicely, but it was in a situation where he wasn't going to overheat the car from running in Sutton's air, but was certainly benefiting from the slipstream that Sutton was creating.
Yeah, but he wasn't under any blue flag pressure from the BMWs behind, and I don't know whether that was down to the pace that he was carrying behind Sutton, or whether the BMWs just didn't have it in them to catch him.
A little bit from column A, a little bit from column B.
Yeah, exactly. Two drivers of note coming through the field were Collard and Chilton. As you say, Chilton only managed to overtake a couple of drivers towards the end of race one, and Cook with the retirement. But they were making good progress, and by the end of the race, they'd managed to both get up into the points. 13th for Collard and 15th for Chilton. Just missing out, of course, on the reverse grid draw for race 3. But it was a good effort from them, and both of them looked racy. Yes, there were drivers that you'd probably expect them to overtake, looking at the pace of both the cars this year.
I agree, but I think last year Chilton wouldn't have made the same level of progress.
No,
in all honesty. And I think that he's, as I said before, having a bit of a renaissance this season. He's found his mojo a little bit. I think taking a win on the opening weekend always helps because it just gets your mojo back up. But fair play to Chilton. He's I wouldn't say it's the Chilton of old, but I would say that he's rolling back the years somewhat. Yes,
certainly is. Camish was making no real progress in this race on the medium tyre, which was unusual to see for me. I don't know whether the car wasn't quite set up or whether it was just down to the brilliant defending of Aaron Taylor-Smith, who seemed to be keeping the whole of the midfield behind him when it was necessary.
I think that Taylor-Smith defended brilliantly in this race, first and foremost. Two caveats, because I love to ruin everything. One, I would say that, as I said earlier, there's where do you overtake a Snetterton? He drove the line very well and made it impossible, but Camish isn't going to try a ridiculous move around the outside of Agostini or somewhere like that because it just doesn't work. No. Second of all, and I hate to be a moaner, this is where hybrid would actually make a difference if you could use it properly, i.e. he could use it to get past him on the straight or coming out of a corner. But the way it's set up, it just doesn't work for that. It just doesn't work. If we had a DRS system, Camish gets past on the Bentley straight, most likely.
Yeah.
The system we have doesn't,
or at least gets into a position where he can outbrake him down into London and Nelson.
But the system we have doesn't work because you don't know when Camish is going to use his hybrid. But if you're Taylor Smith and you've got a lot of laps of it, you're going to gamble it's going to be down the Bentley straight, aren't you?
Yeah, they've both got the same amount of laps from where they finished the positions in race 1. So yes, it's not all the laps in the race, but if you feel like you're coming under pressure, you work out how many laps you've got left, and then you can use it in the necessary places to defend. Yeah. I think it is a really good defensive tool. I don't think it's a very good attacking tool.
I agree with you on that, and I think that is a problem because ultimately you want to see, it's motorsport, you want to see overtakes. As good as defensive driving is, and as I say, Taylor Smith put on a masterclass in how to do it this weekend in this race. But actually, unless you're a racing purist who really enjoys watching defensive driving, it's not what's going to get the fans excited and interested. And you want to see racing, you want to see overtakes. Not to do down what Taylor Swift did, because it was a very good defensive drive. I just think that, this is exactly what hybrid should be fixing, and in my opinion, is exactly what it's failing to do.
Yeah, I think quite noticeably, Taylor Smith's best lap was a 1:58.0, and Camish's was a 1:57.3. That's 7/10 of a difference. You would expect that if he had that sort of difference over the majority of the laps, he should have been able to get past him quicker. But it wasn't till about 2 laps from the end that he was actually managed to make a move on him and get through. One of the other Napa Fords was having a really good battle in this race, which was Sam Osborne, driving well inside the top 10, and was causing some problems for Butcher, wasn't he?
Yeah, Osborne has gone up a gear this season, no doubt buoyed by the confidence of the car, but he's racing well. He's getting himself involved. He's getting his elbows out. He's racing with, quote, more experienced drivers than he is, and he's, on the whole, giving a good account of himself. This is a big year for Osborne. As I think we said at the start of the season, there's nowhere to hide this year. And at the minute, I say that overall, I think there's still more to come, but I think overall, he's not hiding. He's risen to the challenge well. Okay, he's never going to outscore Sutton and Camish in particular on a regular basis, and he's not going to overly outdo Rowbottom on a regular, consistent basis. But his job this year is to win the Jack Sears, which he's currently doing, and he's already picked up a podium along the way, and he's doing pretty well. I'm interested to see. I think that I wouldn't rule out a win this season if circumstance plays right, but I wouldn't rule it out.
So Sutton would go on to take his 4th win on the trot, something that has not been done since 1997 by Alan Menu. And if he were to go on and take race 3 victory, that would be something that hadn't been done since Gabriele Tarquini in the Alpha 155, I believe, in 1994. He took fastest lap along the way in that race, from Jake Hill in 2nd, Colin Turkington 3rd. Rowbottom managed to make progress up to 4th with that soft tyre, finishing quite a way ahead of Morgan in the end, 6 seconds or so. From Jelly, Ingram, Butcher, Osborne, Lloyd, Camish in 11th, Taylor Smith brilliantly defended 12th. Obviously, Collard in 13th, Ronan Pearson winning Jack Sears in 14th, and Tom Chilton in 15th.
One final observation before we go into race 3 is that I wonder when they have the cutoff is for declaring what tyres they're going to use. Because if you're seeing, going back to race 1, Sutton on the grid on a particular tyre, are you not tempted to change it on the grid? Or I wonder if that is a cutoff point.
It's as they roll out the pit lane.
Right, so they can't change it on the grid.
No.
Well, that's that sorted, isn't it? Lovely.
That's
right. On to race number 3 then, and ball number 6 was pulled out of the pot, and I think Ash would have kicked himself when number 6 came out, because I think he could have won race 2 on a hard tyre, particularly as BMW were running mediums for that one. I think he could have won it on the hard tyre, and then he'd have won this at a canter on the soft in race 3 and taken all 3. Now, it's ridiculous that we're coming away from this with Ash Sutton having 2 wins and a 4th and saying that he might be slightly disappointed that he wasn't more.
Yeah, I mean, Ingram was on the hard tyre in race 2, and he dropped from 4th down to 7th. But that's because, one, Rowbottom was on the soft, who made progress, and as you say, the BMWs were on the mediums. Yes, I think there was a little bit of a bigger gap between the mediums and the hards and the soft to the medium. But as you say, I think Sutton probably had the pace in hand. It would have been a much tighter, a much closer race. Probably much more entertaining as well, seeing him trying to hold off Jake Hill and Turkington. But yeah, it's probably his best chance to go for a 3-win weekend.
Yeah, although actually it's Sutton, there'll be another chance that he'll get a chance to take all 3, I would have thought. Now, let's talk circuses, and let's talk the BMW tyre strategy or strategist of the weekend. So all 4 have stuck with the same tyre for each race, meaning that this final race of the day, with the reverse grid, they were all on the hard tyre at the coldest part of not the coldest, but not the hottest part of the day either. All on the same tyre, all together on the grid, And in the end, they completely held each other up and made themselves look very foolish indeed. Is this an oversight by BMW? How on earth did we get here? And do you think we'll see it happen again?
What I'm confused by is, yes, you've got the three BMWs that are running their BMW livery with WSR backing and stuff like that, and then you've got Jake Hill, and I very much doubt that Jake Hill would have had the same engineering briefing to go, okay, we're all going on the hard tyre, or we're all going on the same tyre in each race, so it's equal for everybody. It must have been that sort of decision. Otherwise, I cannot see why Jake Hill didn't go, right, I'm going to run this tyre in this race, and go a different direction to the rest of the BMW boys. And he's the one that's actually lost out the most in this last race.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think this has to have been a commercial and team decision to do it like this in the interest of fairness. But actually, balls to fairness. There's two people that are in a title. Well, no, because there's out of the four, only two of them are in a title battle, right?
Yes.
Morgan was never going to be in a title battle this year in the first team. Jelly is solid, but he's not title challenging material. So actually, balls to that. Turkerton and Hill have to have complete autonomy in what strategies they are able to choose. And it appears to me that there's been too much micromanagement on this, because I cannot buy for 1 minute that the tyre strategists at BMW have sat down and gone, do you know what the best option this weekend is for us to all to do the same. That is how we'll maximise this weekend. And actually, what they've done is they've come away from a track that normally suits them very nicely with, I wouldn't say a complete waste of time, because they've taken podiums along the way, but they were very
all four of them have been in the top 10 for all three races,
which is good.
Taking that away from a weekend is very good, as you say, commercially for the team, but none of them were wins.
And what isn't so good commercially for the team is the fact that in this race they all held each other up, they were all bashing into each other, and they were actually quite lucky that they all four finished, because Morgan did a very silly move trying to cut back on row bottom, which could have caused an accident. Hill, I think, hit every single one of his teammates, either locking up or trying to get past. And all it did was allow Ash Sutton, who was ahead of them, to laugh his way and keep fifth on the road. We'll come to that in a minute. On the hard tyre, completely unchallenged. The four BMWs kept the faster cars behind because they were all messing about for so long until Cook finally picked them off. Obviously, he was on the soft tyre and came from the back of the grid and actually looked really good for the first time this season on that. But all they did was hold each other up and allow Ash, who's championship leader, to get off down the road, win a sort of driver race of his own, and pretty much laugh all the way to the bank.
Yeah, he looked comfortable in this race, and yes, he had some soft tyre runners come past him, but he wasn't worried about them soft tyre runners, because obviously he'd won the opening two races of the weekend. They weren't necessarily drivers of concern.
Getting on to the race itself then, off the start, there was a delayed start. Gamble pulled off the formation lap with an issue, and Edwards withdrew from the race with technical problems. Please God, the car work at Thruxton. This is getting a bit tedious. It's tedious for us. It must be just so frustrating for her.
Yeah.
Off the line, Turkerton was round wide. Again, questions about the racecraft, cut, pace, repeat, etc., etc. We're running over on time, so I won't go down this rabbit hole again. Safe to say that I'm still not convinced about him in wheel-to-wheel combat. Sutton pulled off a ridiculous overrun and pass on Hill on the Bentley straight. Even with the worse tyre, he was still just popping moves left, right, and centre. I actually think the championship is done, without trying to get too depressed or too pessimistic, but I think he's done. I really do.
We'll go home then, and we won't watch a further race this season.
Well, no, we will. We'll come to that on my final thoughts. Lloyd was sent wide after a touch around Taylor Smith. To me, it was just a classic case of 2 into 1 doesn't go. Nothing particularly odorous, and it was a good bit of rallycross skills from Lloyd again. I look forward to seeing the onboard on that on his YouTube channel. We saw Butcher turn up to a race and do a great send on Morgan, which I think was one of the best moves I've seen him do all season. Until, of course, a couple of laps later, he made an even ballsier move on Jelly by going all the way around the outside of the last little complex. Rowbottom did a very nice move for the lead. It turns out the lad can race after all, so that's all the naysayers hopefully binned off. Assuming it was him in the car and not his stunt double. We need to get that clarified, of course.
Don't start that.
Where else should we go? There's a nice big battle pack further down. Taylor Smith, Chilton, Cook, Pearson all together. 4 into one area doesn't go around. Taylor Swift set off into a barrier, all a bit messy, but your classic touring car races, and the stewards put it down to that as there was no punishments following this.
Pearson, as a result of that, managed to tear off the whole of Aaron Taylor Smith's rear bumper, and it managed to get fully locked around the front of his Hyundai, which caused him to have to come into the pits and retire the car, unfortunately, because I assume the temperatures just went through the roof.
Absolutely. Robot did start to struggle on his tyres. It started to go off, and Ingram capitalised with a lovely move, a classic switcheroo into turn number 1, outside to win. Lovely. Even though he was unwell, he can still pull off these kind of moves for the fans, which is always good to see. As I said, the BMWs then started to come together, hill into jelly, which was great when you've got the BMW head honchos down to look at the racing. It's always good when you have the 4 teammates come together.
Yep.
Further back, Cameron was making a steady charge through the field and managed to get all the way up to second place and started chasing down Ingram hard. So hard, he decided he was going to try and launch himself into the atmosphere to get past him by taking a big leap over the sausage curbs on the final lap. And this would potentially come back to haunt him, as he would fail the post race ride height checks. Now, it's impossible to know whether that was from his excursions over the sausage curbs and his little trip into the Earth's atmosphere. However, I think it's likely it contributed personally.
So do I, especially the fact that he did it where we were sitting for the final race down at Brundle and Nelson on the inside of there, to the right hand side of the car. And then he also did it again at Murray's, which was the left hand side of the car. It seemed like the whole front of the car had dropped because it was right in the middle where the roller didn't seem to go underneath. So, yeah, I think it's fairly likely. I doubt that it's something that the team would have done on purpose. Yeah, it would have been interesting to see if he hadn't have ridden those curbs. I think he'd have probably still ended up second anyway. He had to go for it. He sort of had nothing to lose.
I disagree. He's in a championship battle. He's got everything to lose.
Yes, he is, but
he's had a bad weekend and he's guaranteed second.
Expecting every driver to have this bad weekend that we always talk about, and I think this will be his bad weekend for the season. But yeah, we don't know what could have been, sort of thing.
Well, to round up then the top 15, Tom Ingram from Rory Butcher and his Toyota Avensis, from Dan Rowbottom, who was promoted up to third. Camish's exclusion meant that Ash Sutton took fourth. Josh Cook from the back to fifth with a great effort. Stephen Jelly, who I thought was one of the standout performers for the BMW this weekend personally, very steady and in the main avoided trouble. He finished in sixth. Colin Turkington seventh. Aidan Moffat out of nowhere finished in the top 10, getting eighth from Adam Morgan. Jake Hill, as you mentioned, the big loser, down in 10th. Tom Chilton, Bobby Thompson, Dexter Patterson in the points again. Ricky Collard and Mikey Doble in the points rounded out your top 15.
One thing I must say is that I don't know whether One Motorsport have unlocked an actual proper setup for that car in that final race, but Cook and Moffat, yes, I think they were both on the soft tyre, but they both looked really, really quick.
I will see what happens at Thruxton on that one.
Yeah. I mean, that is where it will show and will tell, hopefully.
So the weekend shenanigans mean that Ash Sutton is now top of the table. He is, well, we'll come to it in my final thoughts in a moment. But yeah, Ash Sutton leads the way at the top of the table. He is now on 135 points. Tom Ingram on 128, from Colin Turkington 109, Dan Camish 98, Jake Hill 98, and then a bit of a gap back to Dan Rowbottom, who is on 69. Sam, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, I would like to award some awards.
Oh yeah, we're doing that in this pod, don't we? Yeah. Good call. We'll do that then.
Driver of the day, undoubtedly, I think for both of us, is Sutton.
Yeah, agreed.
To have 2 wins and a 4th, and we're still going, could it have been better? But yeah, still driver of the day for both of us. My villain is going to be the hard tyre this weekend. As we've mentioned it in a couple of the races there, I just think the gap between the medium and the hard was a little bit too much. If you bring that a little bit closer together, I think you'll have a lot more competition and drivers won't plummet through the field like some of them did. But yeah, I think that's going to come with learning.
Yep, I'm going for the BMW strategy team as discussed at the start of race 3. Terrible decision, and it can't happen again at Croft, surely.
No, you'd like to think not. Your good surprise of the weekend, mate.
I'm going for One Motorsport. Look, Cook did pretty well in race 1. Race 2, yeah, it's a problem that you can't really help with a puncture, etc.
Showed his pace though.
Yeah, showed its pace. In race 3, they're both in the points with Moffat and Cook. Is the corner turned? I don't know. But coming into this weekend, I wouldn't have necessarily said that both would score decent points, and they have done, which is important for obviously the team battles. And actually, in the independent teams battle, they are second, but only by a point, which is important.
Ooh, okay. My good surprise might surprise a few people actually, and that is Napa.
Wow, you're surprised at the fastest car on the grid. Well, actually, it's important to point out that it's not the fastest car on the grid because they're actually slow through the speed traps. So it's not a case of the engine being brilliant. Get that in there because Tim Harvey said it was a good point before we start talking about boost reductions. But you're going for the car that leads the championship, has a championship winning driver in it, and it's very good. It's a surprise. Wow.
I am, because this was a track which was meant to be BMW Haven, and Sutton primarily. Camish has done pretty well as well, showing that pace in the final race. They've knocked them out the park almost. They've found a setup on Sutton's car which just works. They haven't changed it since Brands, and it works really well here, and it will probably work really well at Thruxton as well. I wasn't expecting this. We're now through 3 full rounds of the championship, and I thought we've had 3 very different style tracks as well. And I thought one of them might be a little bit of a downfall for that Napa car, but I'm not sure there's any chink in that armour.
I see what you're saying. Let's see what Thruxton brings.
Just pleasantly surprised by it.
If it goes well at Thruxton, then I think you've had all 4 style of tracks, and it's very, very
ominous.
Ominous, that's the word. My bad surprise of the weekend, I've gone for Auto Bright Team Hard. Good weekend at Brands Hatch and Donington. Not so good here, albeit that they've held their hands. Have gone, yeah, it was a bit of a stinker. We know what the changes. We know where we need to change. We know where we've gone wrong. We'll be back at Thruxton, and we'll see how that goes. But a bit of a stinker. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to contradict my last point, and I'm going to go for Camish. I didn't see him making a mistake in qualifying like he did. And then to push so hard in that final race to possibly, we think, cause damage to the car to mean that he was then disqualified. I'm assuming that there's no one else's fault apart from his for that to happen. And as you say, when he got just outside that top 10, he then again wasn't able to make progress. So it's a weekend to forget for him.
Absolutely. Right. Now the awards done. Do you have any final thoughts for the weekend?
I should have worn sun cream.
Yes, massively.
Definitely. Thruxton is going to be an interesting one next time out.
Is it?
Yes, because I think there are teams that are building, as in One Motorsport. We're expecting that the Honda should go well there in the hands of Josh Cook.
And Toyota.
And will they build to the point where I think they should be? Will they be challenging these top 3 teams in BMW, Hyundai, and Napa? Or are Napa just going to walk away with it?
Well, that links into my final thoughts, which is, to answer your question, no. I think we've seen in the opening 3 rounds that there are 5 drivers that are above the rest, and there are 3 teams that are above the rest, and I really don't see that changing. You look at the standings in the championship, and you see already a big gap between top. It's a big gap. You've already got drivers over the 100-point mark, 9 rounds in. You've had Sutton take back-to-back hauls of over 60 points or near enough 60 points. I've not got the exact maths in front of me. And you look on the track as well, those 5 drivers are consistently ahead and well ahead of the rest of the field. So in answer to your question, no. Even if reverse grid, I don't necessarily see another team winning anything this year because those 5, unless you get a 12 and all those 5 are pushed right to the back of that part of that 12, grid reverse or 11, just don't see it personally. I think that those 5 are so far ahead, and I think the championship is done the way it is. Sutton is, when he gets in this zone, it's scary because every track he's on it, he's dialed in, and he looks so super focused, but at the same time super relaxed in that car, and that's a very dangerous combination where Sutton is concerned.
And effectively, he's already had his bad weekend at Donington.
Yeah. This reminds me of his championship in the Subaru, where he just got into tandem with the car. It came very easily, or it certainly came across as it was going very easily.
Yeah.
And I just think that when he gets in this groove, it takes something special to stop him. And I'm not convinced that Camish has got it over a season. I certainly don't think Turkington does. And I've been a little bit underwhelmed with both Ingram and Hill so far. But I don't see another team taking a win this year. It's going to be BMW. It's going to be Hyundai. It's going to be Napa. The fact that Napa have had a podium at every single round so far is utterly crazy.
Yeah. And one final thing for me as well. I'm looking to see how much of a difference the tyres make next time out. We have to use all 3 compounds. Whether there's going to be such a drop off from the hard, whether the soft is going to last as long. I'm wondering whether they're going to change up those compounds so we see more degrading from the soft towards the end of the race. Because I still think it was too strong when you got into those final laps. Yes, people say it's artificial to adapt races in that way, but I think if you're able to manage a tyre well, it's a sign of a good driver.
Yeah, I agree. I've got no problem with the tyres. I just think that there is potentially too much difference across the 3 compounds. However, as I've said, caveat is Snetterton is difficult to overtake. Let's see what Croft brings in that regard. I don't want to have another go at hybrid before I go, but it's not working. Well, you talk about artificially changing a race, and I agree with that. And Success Ballast has got, for every person that thinks it's a good thing, it's got critics, and I completely understand that. But it worked. There's no question. It worked.
Yeah.
Hybrid for me isn't working, and actually all it's doing is making the field further apart because those, particularly 5 drivers, are just they're unbeatable. There's no way of clipping their wings because you give them 1 second of or 1 use of hybrid and it's only lasts a second. Who cares? It's Ash Sutton. It really doesn't matter. You can take it away from him and he'd still win races. It doesn't. It's not strong enough for the competition to make any difference to these 5 drivers.
I certainly think it needs to have a horsepower increase when you use it, significant one, rather than just, I think, the 40 that it gives at the moment. If it's closer to 100 and you can actually almost physically see it on track when someone's on hybrid, you can see them boosting basically, then I think it would have more of an effect. But until that happens, which probably now is until next season at the earliest.
There's not going to be a change. There's not going to be a change halfway through the season because that then does upset integrity, and that then does come to that. But I'm not hating. I'm not a fan, but I think last year we gave it a little bit more of a little bit more slack. Leeway slack. This year, with the way it's going already, as I say, one of those 5 drivers are going to win the championship. In my opinion, only one of those drivers is going to win the championship, and the field is being left behind them.
Anyway, don't forget to subscribe, give us a comment below, and also don't forget to leave us a like and get the bell on YouTube. We will be back for a Thruxton preview next week now. So hopefully this will go out over the weekend. All being well, stay safe, and we'll be back with a preview.
And remember, if you've not seen a video of me failing to put up a chair, it is 7 minutes of your life you won't get back. However, you might find it quite funny. And yes, 7 minutes to put up a chair. Longer, but edited for YouTube purposes.
Thank you very much.
Bye!